Hello and welcome to Aging Matters, a program featuring individuals who talk about aging-related issues of interest to older adults and their families. I'm Cheryl Beversdorf, your host. Today, I'm pleased to share another episode of Aging Matters Stories of Life, programs featuring guests who share the way their experiences have made a difference to them and to their community. Today, my guest is Mary Margaret Whipple, Arlington resident and former Democratic member of the Senate of Virginia. Mary Margaret will talk about how her interest in public service led her to leadership roles both in county and state government. She will also discuss her legislative accomplishments during public sector service and her ongoing efforts to highlight the unique benefits women bring to political office. So welcome, Mary Margaret, and thank you for joining me on the show today.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Cheryl.
So let's get started by learning a little bit about you. Where were you born and where did you grow up?
So I was born in Illinois, which is where my parents were from. But when I was 6, we moved to Texas. My father took a job as a professor at Texas A&M University in College Station, Texas. And that's where I did my growing up.
Okay, and anything significant as you were growing up, or was it pretty standard growing up period for you?
Oh, I think I had a wonderful childhood. Those were the days when children had a lot of freedom and you could go out and just play outdoors for hours on end. And as long as you got home at dinner time, it was okay. We had an interlude where we moved to Wisconsin for a little over a year while my father was working on his PhD at the University of Wisconsin. But otherwise, from first grade through high school, I was in College Station.
So let's take it to the next step. What college did you attend and what was your academic interest there? And after that, did you pursue a postgraduate degree?
My college career was 2 years at Rice University in Houston, Texas. I married at the end of my sophomore year, and then we moved to the Washington area, and I went to and graduated from American University with a degree in English. In later years, then I went back for a master's degree at George Washington University.
And you said you were majored in English. What was that kind of what your first job was in that particular arena, or how did that work?
Yes, it was. I was an editor at the U.S. Office of Education when it was still in office. So I was in the publications office, and it was really interesting because every department in the education office sent their works to be published through the Office of Publications, and then we handled the work with the government printing office, which meant that we edited all the material that came through the Department of Education. And it was an interesting job for a young woman because there were some much older and sure of themselves editors in each department who did not like it one little bit if you found something that you wanted to change about their work. So it was a good education, and I enjoyed that a lot.
Sounds like there were already the signs of women versus men activities in your life. Now, was this in Arlington? Were you in Arlington when this first started, or did you come to Arlington a little later?
When we first got married, we moved to Arlington. We were here for a year, then we were overseas for a year, and then Tom was in the Army and we moved around quite a bit. The job with the U.S. Office of Education, we actually lived in D.C. And then when he completed his time in the Army, we moved.
And as I understand it, you were also an instructor at Northern Virginia Community College. Is that
yes,
correct?
Yes, I was. A few years after that, I started teaching part-time at Northern Virginia Community College. And in those days, I had little children at home, so I taught at night and on the weekends. And then I graded papers while they took their naps, and it all worked out and was a good way to put my newly minted master's degree to work.
And did you enjoy teaching?
I did. And, the one thing I enjoyed particularly about Northern Virginia Community College was that every student really wanted to be there. Maybe they were working and they figured out that they needed to advance their education. The students were quite varied in their backgrounds. So I would get students who had been in the Army and got their GED while they were in the Army. Or I remember particularly a young woman who came from West Virginia with a high school education, became a secretary in the Washington region. But she was so interested in pursuing her education and to advancing in life. And she ended up getting a BS from George Mason University, going part-time for several years. So others were older than I was. It was very interesting to teach there. I soon learned I had to diversify the curriculum a bit because some people needed a little extra help and others were quite ready for the course content.
Well, it sounds like this must have been kind of the segue into your interest in public service. So what was it that led you to pursue public service, and how did you begin your participation in this area?
So I was telling a group from AAUW recently that AAUW was so instrumental in getting me started in this endeavor. They appointed me to the AAUW slot on the school board's Advisory Council on Instruction, which is the main advisory body to the Arlington School Board. I served on that commission for a couple of years. Then I became chairman of the Advisory Council on Instruction. The year after that, I was chairman of the 5-year planning committee for the Arlington schools. And then the year after that, the county board appointed me to the school board itself. So I had already figured out that I really liked the idea of being on the policy-making board. While I was a volunteer at my children's school and enjoyed doing that, I wanted to have something that would impact the whole school system. And obviously that's what the school board does. So it was a pretty direct progression there from these advisory committees to then being on the school board. And as I said, at that time it was appointed.
Then did that lead you to actually run for a seat on the Arlington County Board?
It did. So I was very disappointed with the way the county board was handling school funding and issues, and not as supportive of the recommendations that came from the school board as I thought they ought to be. And so decided to run for the county board. Several people had talked to me about doing that. I don't know that I would have done it without that encouragement. So that's something to remember, that if you want someone to run for office, you should encourage and help them to do that. But the first time I ran, I lost. Also a good learning experience.
And so how long were you on that first time, or how long was the total period that you were on the county board?
Okay, let's see. Well, I lost the first time in 1979. I ran again in 1982 and started on the county board in January of 1983. And I was on the county board then until 1996 when I went to the Senate. So 13 years.
And during that time, were there other women on the county board?
There were. Okay. Actually, in Arlington and Northern Virginia generally, there's a pretty good record of women in elective office. And when I joined the county board, 3 of the 5 board members were women. So that was not so uncommon in this area. I can tell you in other parts of the state to this day, there are boards of supervisors that have never had a woman as a member.
And while you were on the county board, what were the issues that you took the most active interest in, and what were your greatest accomplishments while you were on the county board?
Well, I would boil it down probably to three things when I was on the county board. One was that my original inspiration was education. I wanted to see Arlington have a really good school system that educated all of our children very well. And that required the funding resources from the county board. Policy decision made by the school board. County board was limited to appointing the school board members and then funding the budget. So one thing I was known for when I was on the county board was making sure that the school board got full funding for the school budget. And I felt very good about that. And we appointed, I thought, very good people to the school board. I left the policy decisions to them. But that took away my major interest. And I had to kind of stop and rethink, what is it that I really want? So that led to two other issues. One, I've always been very interested in the environment. And I was responsible for the beautification program that we had in Arlington. There was an advisory committee on beautification, but they never had much support. And I really elevated that to a point. We did a major tree planting program, and that continues to this day. And the county has taken much better care of its parks and other outdoor environments. And then the second part of that was that I was appointed to the Metro Board. So I had a very deep interest in public transit and spent, I guess, 10 years maybe on the Metro Board, including 1 year as chairman of the Metro Board. So public transit and promoting transit. And at that time, we were still building the metro system. So that was a very challenging job. And the other part of it that was challenging, what was then the governance of Metro. At the time, there were 2 representatives from each state. So 2 from Maryland, 2 from DC, and 2 from Virginia. And then we each had an alternate. For anything to pass the Metro Board, it had to get not only 4 out of 6 votes, but there had to get 1 vote from each state. So I can just tell you, it took a lot of negotiation to get items through the Metro Board. And one state could hold things up and nothing would happen until you figured out a way to get them to come on board and support a particular issue or budget or whatever the matter happened to be.
Well, even though you spent quite a bit of time on the county board, obviously you decided to move on. So tell us a little bit about what made you decide to run for the office of the Virginia State Senate.
I think by then I had been on the county board for 13 years, not as long as some people, but still quite a long time. And some of the issues started to come around again. And I thought, well, you know, I've already worked on that issue, and here it is 12 years later, and we're having to revise it and do it all over again. But the other thing was, and more importantly, that when you are in local government, you realize all the interaction and intersections you have with the state government, and how things that you think are good locally could happen all over the state if you made the decision at the state level. And so it was a way of looking at things on a broader basis, statewide basis, and making things happen for all of Virginia and not just for one locality. And that really appealed to me. And at the time, our state senator retired and there was an opening.
And were you kind of like a pioneer? Were you one of the first women in the state to want to be a senator? What was the situation at that time?
Not the first, but not too many years after the first person. But the year that I was elected to the Senate, 2 other women were elected. So 3 of us joined the existing 4 women. 2 of them had just been elected in the previous election. So really for quite a while, there were only 1 or 2 women generally in the Senate. But when we came in, it made 7. And that was like, wow, that's 7 out of 40.
Okay. And when you decided to do this, was it a tough campaign? I mean, remembering this area?
I actually was elected pretty easily to the Senate. Once you get the Democratic nomination in Arlington, you're in pretty good shape. And as it happened, that because I was well known from having been on the county board for all those years and the school board before that, often a big piece of electoral success is that a lot of people know you or know of you. And so that really helped me in that regard. But my hardest election was when I ran for the county board the second time, and I defeated the incumbent chairman of the board. And that was a tough election.
So that was harder than actually when you decided to move on to the Senate, sounds like.
That's right.
Right. Okay, so now what year are we now in terms of the Senate?
So I went to the Senate in 1996.
Okay. And so what committees were you pursuing or interested in the same kinds of issues, or how did that work?
So you get to put in a request slip that says which committees you're interested in serving on. And actually the one I wanted at the time the most was the Education and Health Committee, but I did not get that. So I served in the course of the years in the Senate, I served on several different committees, and truthfully, each one of them is very interesting. I mean, that's where it's the committee work that makes the General Assembly work. You get in a course of a General Assembly session, there's something like 3,000 bills introduced, more in the House than in the Senate, but easily 1,000 bills in the Senate. And where you do the detailed work is at the committee level. Anything that is complicated may have a subcommittee work on it. At least it's going to have considerable committee time devoted to the ins and outs and the questions and the speakers, so that you get a good understanding of that. And while you can't read 1,000 bills, you can read all the bills that come to your committees. So I served over time on the Agricultural and Natural Resources Committee, the Privileges and Elections Committee that deals with appointments and election law, the Transportation Committee, and ultimately I did get appointed to the Education and Health Committee. So I was very pleased about that. And then finally, my last 4 years, I was on the Finance Committee, which determines the state budget in collaboration with the House of Delegates and the governor. And that was, I loved being on the Finance Committee. And that's where it's the budget that puts policy into practice. And so being on that budget committee, where I actually chaired the Natural Resources Subcommittee, that was really a very gratifying kind of work to do. And I've always been very interested in budget and finance.
And you also had a leadership role in the Virginia State Senate. Talk about that.
I did. So I was elected the chairman of the Senate Democratic Caucus. And that in the Senate is considered to be a leadership position. So there's the majority leader, the minority leader, the chairs of the Republican and Democratic Caucus, and the president pro tem. Those are the 5 leadership positions in the Senate. I was the first woman to be in a leadership position in the Senate ever.
Congratulations.
Except 375 years or something like that. Finally there was a woman in a leadership position. What I think is really the most gratifying about that is that now there are many. So yes, I was the first, but now there are so many more, and it's so great to see.
So any special memories that you want to talk about when you were in the Senate, or accomplishments?
I mentioned before that I've always been very interested in the environment. And as it happened, there were a couple of very notable people Joe Garland in the Senate, Taylor Murphy in the House, who everybody looked to for environmental advice and leadership. And they both retired after I'd been in the Senate a few years. So there was a bit of a natural opening there for someone to step up and take leadership in that area. And I felt like I was an apprentice at their knees the first few years. But then I had an opportunity to really make a difference in that issue. And 3 different years while I was in the Senate, I was the Legislator of the Year for the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. Worked very closely with them on water quality issues. So I did a really major legislation on wetlands, and also legislation that established a wetlands mitigation bank. I mean, I realize some of this is a little technical, but this is how you get things done. I started the Natural Resources Commitment Fund, which ended up putting specific money into agricultural best practices. And these are things like planting trees along a stream or fencing off a stream so that animals don't get into it, or using cover crops. There are multiple things that you do that are considered to be best management practices in agriculture. And we put significant effort into that program. And because of the fund that I was able to start, it's been much better funded. And this year just got a large amount of money. I was tickled pink when I saw the governor's budget, that so much money had gone into that.
What made you decide to leave the Senate?
I had, you look at another 4, it's a 4-year term, so it's not an insignificant commitment. I had reached age 70. I had been in public service life, elected or appointed office for 35 years. And my husband and I thought, I thought that it was time for us to get to do some things that we hadn't been able to do. One of the things was that I was ending up having to do a lot of travel. I think people know the General Assembly meets for 2 months in the wintertime, so you go and live in Richmond during the week for those 2 months. But then with all the committees that I was on, particularly the Finance Committee, there was just a lot of travel around the state, and I was just gone a lot. And it seemed like I was ready to stay home a little bit more and maybe do some other things. So I announced in almost a year in advance that I was retiring. And here's the good thing. A wonderful woman succeeded me. Barbara Favola is the senator for much of Arlington in the 31st district. And of course, she brought new energy and a new perspective to the position. So I knew it was in good hands.
Just in summary, what would you say, Mary Margaret, has been your greatest passion throughout your life?
Maybe you've guessed by listening to me that I really care about public service and public policy. This idea that you can go beyond your individual effort and create a system that provides opportunities for people all over the state was something that just really appeals to my heart. So, for example, you could help somebody find health insurance or give them money to buy health insurance. But what I did was end up working really hard to get Medicaid expansion in Virginia. So that now once that was approved, now over 400,000 people have health insurance through the Medicaid expansion program in Virginia. That's the kind of thing that really motivates me to do this kind of work.
And also what you've done in terms of promoting women, and I certainly congratulate you on that.
Yes, thank you very much.
Well, I want to thank Mary Margaret Whipple, former Democratic member of the Virginia Senate, for joining me today. And I hope these stories of life Episodes have been enlightening and may inspire you to think in new ways about your own life experiences. This program is broadcast Sundays at 5:30 p.m. and Wednesdays at 6 p.m. on Comcast Channel 69 or Verizon Channel 38 in Arlington, Virginia, or streaming live at those times on arlingtonmedia.org. Aging Matters is also on the radio. The program is broadcast every Tuesday at 2 p.m. on WERA-LP Arlington 96.7 FM. And finally, be sure to check out the new Aging Matters website, agingmattersonline.com, for more information about all of our radio programs and TV episodes. Thank you for watching the program today. Please join me again for the next Aging Matters show. And until then, remember, age is just a number, not a label.